The sunny morning over the sea was perfect for fishing. Jan, an experienced fisherman, set out to sea on his small boat, full of hope for a good catch. He knew this area like the back of his hand, every bay, every reef. The smooth surface of the water reflected the bright sun, and the sky was cloudless. Jan never forgot how his father taught him to fish, showing him where the best fishing spots were. Every time he went out to sea, his heart was filled with joy and peace. But this day, something felt different. The weather suddenly changed. Dark clouds appeared on the horizon, and the wind started to pick up. Jan didn't want to panic, though an inner voice told him he should head back. He trusted his skills and experience, so he continued fishing. Soon, the clouds unleashed a torrential downpour, and a strong wind overturned his boat. Jan didn't have time to react. The water flooded the vessel, and it began to sink rapidly. Grabbing his life jacket, he surfaced and looked around. The sea was raging, and his boat had already disappeared beneath the waves. His heart pounded. He realized he was now completely at the mercy of nature, far from shore, with no immediate hope of rescue. Panic gripped him, but he knew he had to stay calm. The water was cold, and the wind cut through him like a knife. He struggled to stay afloat, his strength ebbing away. To hold on to hope, Jan began recalling memories from his life, how he first went to sea with his father, how they fished together and shared their catch with friends. These memories gave him the strength to keep fighting. Jan realized he had to act quickly. He started swimming in what he thought was the direction of land, hoping to come across a shore or other fishing boats. His strength was fading, but the thought of returning to his family kept him going. He knew he couldn't give up as long as there was a glimmer of hope. Every second spent in the water was a battle against the cold and fear. Swimming became an exhausting ordeal. Then, as if by some stroke of fate, he noticed a flicker of light on the horizon. His heart raced. Could this be his salvation? Summoning the last of his strength, he swam toward the light, despite the cold and exhaustion. The water churned around him, crashing against rocks, but he kept pushing forward. As the light grew closer, Jan realized it was a lighthouse, standing tall on a small island. Gathering his courage, he swam toward the shore, though his limbs were barely functioning. Each stroke was a struggle, but the thought of rescue spurred him on. Jan understood that his survival depended on how quickly he could reach land. When Jan finally dragged himself onto the shore, he collapsed on the sand, exhausted and depleted. He couldn't believe he was still alive. The island was eerily quiet, but the solitude quickly overwhelmed him again. He had no food, no water, and his health was deteriorating rapidly. His mind raced with thoughts of how he could escape this place. Jan gathered what little strength he had left and decided to search for sources of food. He remembered how, during fishing trips, he had caught mollusks and crabs. Using rocks and sticks, he fashioned primitive tools and began foraging for food. The first few days were incredibly tough. He had to collect rainwater and search for edible plants. Jan explored the island, and his survival skills began to pay off. He fished using his knowledge, and he found edible roots and berries. But the nights were especially hard. Darkness enveloped the island, and the sounds of the wild heightened his fear. Jan understood that he was entirely alone and that his survival depended solely on him. Every day he grew more tired and emaciated, but he never lost hope. He continued to explore the island, hoping that somehow, someone would find him. Days passed, but there was no sign of rescue. Jan felt his body weakening. Every night, he gazed at the stars, hoping to spot a rescue signal. But the only sound he heard was the waves crashing against the shore. He didn't know how long it had been since his boat capsized, but each day blurred into the next. He began writing messages in the sand, hoping that if anyone saw them from the sea, they would come to his aid. "Help! I'm here. Save me." His words were directed at the world that seemed to have forgotten him. Every day, he climbed a hill to scan the horizon in hopes of spotting a ship, but his hopes were continually dashed. Resigned to spending more time on the island, Jan began to adapt to his new life. He built a shelter from branches and leaves to protect himself from the rain and wind. Jan learned to make use of the resources around him: sticks, stones, and plants. His survival became a battle not only with nature but also with himself. Every day, he reminded himself not to give up. One day, as Jan climbed the hill again, he saw something unusual. On the horizon, a silhouette of a boat appeared. His heart raced. He began waving his arms and shouting at the top of his lungs. The boat was approaching, but this time Jan knew what he had to do. He decided to use his last chance and lit a fire with dry branches. He knew that smoke could attract attention. The fire blazed, and the smoke rose into the sky. The boat moved toward him faster. Jan waved frantically, shouting, his heart full of hope. When the boat neared the shore, he saw two fishermen. Their faces were surprised, but then they broke into wide smiles as they realized they had saved someone. The fishermen pulled Jan into the boat, and he felt life returning to his body. They took care of him, feeding him and giving him water. Jan was overwhelmed with emotion. He couldn't believe he was back on solid ground. His rescuers told him they had been fishing nearby and noticed the smoke. Jan shared his story with them, and the fishermen listened in awe. He spoke of his fears, how he had fought for his life, and how important it was to believe in yourself, even when the odds seemed hopeless. When Jan returned home, he realized how important his family and friends were. He promised himself never to forget the value of life and how, even in the darkest moments, hope can lead to salvation. He remembered every minute spent on the island, every trial he had overcome. These memories stayed in his heart forever. Jan began telling his story at fishing gatherings, sharing his experience with others. He spoke of how important it is to stay strong, even when the world around you seems empty. His stories inspired many fishermen, who began to appreciate not only their work but their lives. Jan became a symbol of strength and hope for everyone who knew him. Time passed, and Jan became a well-known local fisherman. His survival stories inspired many. He continued to share his story, reminding others of the importance of being prepared for any unexpected events and never losing hope, even in the most difficult moments. The sea became not just a place for fishing but a teacher, one that had taught him to value life, nature, and the people around him. Jan understood that despite his experience, the sea would always hold dangers. But he also knew that with inner strength and faith in yourself, you could overcome any obstacle. Every time he went out to sea, he looked toward the horizon and thanked fate for the chance to be alive and to share his stories with others. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.